"I have stayed single by choice, your grace," the young woman said, with a smile that did not reach for his approval in the least, "and I confess I find it a very restful arrangement. You needn't look so alarmed." Lucien Marable, 7th Duke of Vernham, was not accustomed to being told that he looked alarmed, chiefly because he was not accustomed to feeling it. He had spent 15 years being the most sought-after and least catchable man in 3 counties, and in all that time no woman had ever spoken to him in that particular tone, the tone one uses with an amusing but slightly tiresome nephew. He had approached her expecting the usual thing, the fluttering, the sudden interest in whatever he chose to discuss, the careful angling of a face toward the best light. Instead he had got this: amusement. Faint, well-meaning, thoroughly unimpressed amusement. "I am not alarmed," he said. "You have the look of a man who has just discovered that his horse can talk," she said, "and does not care for its opinions, but I dare say it will pass." She turned back to the long windows of Lady Ashcombe's music-room, where the last of the afternoon light lay gold across the lawns, and appeared to consider the conversation concluded. It was not concluded. Lucien did not permit conversations to conclude before he had finished with them. "You have the advantage of me," he said. "You know my name and I do not know yours." "Everyone knows your name, your grace. That is rather the difficulty with dukes. They are terribly easy to identify and terribly hard to be rid of." But she relented, and there was warmth beneath the dryness which was somehow worse than if there had been none. "Beatrix Callowell. My aunt is Lady Ashcombe. I keep her house and read to her in the evenings, and when she has a party, I stand at the window like this and watch clever men make fools of themselves. It is one of the great pleasures of my situation." "And I am the clever man making a fool of himself." "You are trying very hard not to be. It is going about as well as these things usually do." Lucien Marable was 39 years old. He had been pursued, flattered, schemed after, and openly bid upon by the mothers of the realm since he was 22, and somewhere in the middle of all of it the whole business of courtship had curdled in him into a kind of weary contempt. He knew every move before it was made. He knew the sigh, the dropped glove, the sudden feint, the arranged encounter in the shrubbery. He had grown so expert in the choreography of being wanted that he had stopped believing any of it was real, and had privately concluded that no woman had ever wanted him for anything but his name, his houses, and the 12,000 a year that came with them. And here was a woman leaning on a window-sill, watching the light on the grass, telling him plainly that she wanted none of it and found his efforts faintly comic. He should have been offended. He should have bowed and walked away and forgotten her by supper. He did not walk away. "Why," he said, "have you stayed single by choice?" She glanced at him, and for the first time something serious moved behind the amusement. "Because I watched my mother marry for advantage and spend 20 years regretting it," she said simply. "Because a woman who marries surrenders nearly everything and is thanked for it. Because I read a great deal and think a great deal, and neither of those is considered an asset in a wife. And because," the smile came back, "I have yet to meet a man whose company I preferred to that of a good book and a quiet window. You are welcome to try to be the exception, your grace, but I warn you, the book is Marcus Aurelius and he is very good." Lucien, who had not read Marcus Aurelius since he was 19 and had found him tedious, said, "He is a Stoic. Stoics disapprove of pleasure." "Stoics disapprove of being ruled by pleasure," she corrected. "There is a difference, and it is precisely the difference between a man who enjoys a fine dinner and a man who lives for the next one. I should have thought a duke would know it." She tilted her head. "Or perhaps not. You have the look of a man who has been given too much of everything and enjoys none of it. That is not stoicism. That is only surfeit." He should not have found that agreeable. He found it agreeable. In one afternoon, this niece who kept her aunt's house and read to her in the evenings had seen further into him than the whole of society had managed in 15 years, and had told him so to his face, without malice and without wanting anything in return. "Miss Callowell," he said, "I intend to call on your aunt." "My aunt will be delighted. She adores a duke. She will spend the entire visit steering me toward you like a shepherd with one particularly stupid sheep." Beatrix smiled. "I only ask that you not encourage her. It is unkind to raise hopes one has no intention of fulfilling, and you have no intention of fulfilling them. You are curious about me because I am the first mouse in years that would not run into your trap. When the novelty wears thin, you will go back to your window and your surfeit, and I would rather my aunt not have furnished a trousseau in the meantime." And with that she inclined her head, precisely as much as courtesy required and not 1 degree more, and went to see to her aunt's tea, leaving the Duke of Vernham standing alone by the long windows in the gold light, unaccountably, thoroughly disarmed. He called the next week, and the week after that, and by the fourth visit even he could no longer pretend it was novelty. Lady Ashcombe was, as predicted, ecstatic. She received the Duke of Vernham as though the sun had condescended to visit her drawing-room, and she deployed every stratagem in an old campaigner's arsenal to leave him alone with her niece, remembering urgent letters, discovering she had left her spectacles in the far conservatory, developing sudden and convenient fatigues. Beatrix bore it all with unruffled good humor and undermined it at every turn, insisting on accompanying her aunt to find the spectacles, ringing for a footman to fetch the letters, and generally refusing to be maneuvered. "You are making my aunt's life very difficult," Lucian observed one afternoon, when Lady Ashcombe had retreated in defeat to take a nap. "I am making it very interesting," Beatrix said. "She has not had this much sport in years. She will speak of your visits for a decade. I am doing her a great kindness by ensuring nothing comes of them. A decade of hope is worth far more to a woman of 70 than a fortnight of triumph followed by a lifetime of watching me be unhappy." "You are very certain you would be unhappy?" "I am very certain that men who have never wanted for anything make poor husbands, because they have never learned to value a thing they had to wait for." She said it lightly, but she was watching him, and there was a question folded inside the observation. Lucian did not answer it at once. He had come, over these weeks, to look forward to these afternoons with an intensity that alarmed him more than anything Beatrix had said the first day. He, who had been bored for 15 years, was not bored in this house. She argued with him. She disagreed with his politics, corrected his Latin, mocked his waistcoats, and once memorably told him that his prize hunter was overbred and nervous, and would break its own leg within the year if he did not stop showing it off. She laughed at him constantly and cared for his good opinion not at all, and the effect of this on a man who had been flattered into numbness was like cold water on a sleeping limb. It hurt, and it woke everything up. "You spoke of a man learning to value a thing he had to wait for," he said. "How long a wait did you have in mind?" Beatrix set down her sewing. "Your Grace, do not," she said, and for once there was no dryness in it at all. "Do not flirt with the idea of me. You are a very great man, and I am the poor niece who keeps a house, and even if by some madness you meant it, the world would make you regret it and me pay for it. You would be pitied and I would be hated, and within a year you would remember that you could have had anyone, and I would see you remember it, and it would break something in me that I have taken great care to keep whole. I like you. That is the trouble. If I did not like you, I could enjoy this game forever. But I have begun to like you, and a woman who has begun to like a duke is a woman standing at the edge of a very deep well, and I would rather step back now than fall in and be told afterward that I ought to have known better." It was the most she had ever let him see. He understood all at once that her lightness was not indifference. It was armor, worn by a clever woman who had watched her mother drown in exactly this well and had sworn she never would. And he understood with a clarity that rearranged the whole of him that he did not want to play the game either. He wanted to marry her. The realization did not arrive as a flutter or a fancy. It arrived as a fact, plain and immovable as a wall, and it had been building itself brick by brick over 4 weeks of being disagreed with by a woman at a window. "Beatrix," he said, her name, not her title, for the first time, "I have been wanted by a great many people for a great many things, and not one of them ever told me to step back from the well for my own sake. You are the first person in 15 years who has tried to protect me from myself, and you did it while believing you would get nothing for it. Do you understand what that means to a man in my position? It means you are the only person I have met in my adult life whom I can believe. I do not want the game either. I never did. I only did not know there was anything else to be had. She had gone quite pale. You are saying this because it is the one thing I told you that you cannot have. That is all this is. You are Vernham. You want the door that will not open. When it opens, you will lose interest, as you have lost interest in everything else you were given too easily. Then do not give it to me easily, he said. You said a man values what he has to wait for. Make me wait. Make me earn it. Set me any trial you like and I will meet it. And if at the end you still believe I want only the closed door, I will go and never trouble you again. But I do not think you believe it. I think you are frightened, which is a different thing, and I think you are frightened because you have begun to hope, and hope terrifies you more than any duke ever could. For a long moment Beatrix Callowell said nothing at all, which he had learned was the surest sign he had struck true, for when she was certain of herself she never lacked for words. That, she said at last unsteadily, was unfair, and accurate. I dislike it very much when you are both at once. She picked up her sewing again, though her hands were not quite steady. Very well, your grace, you want a trial, you shall have one. Autumn is coming, and every year my aunt removes to the coast, and I am left alone here to close the great house. The shutters, the accounts, the tenants, the whole tedious machinery of it, 6 weeks of dust and ledgers and no society whatsoever. If you are the man you claim to be, and not merely a bored duke chasing a locked door, then come and help me close the house. Not as a duke, as a pair of hands. No footman of yours, no carriage in the drive to impress anyone, no witnesses to flatter you. 6 weeks of ledgers and leaking roofs and my company and nothing else. If at the end of it you still want me, the real me, the ink-stained, argumentative, unadorned me in an empty house with no one watching, then you may ask me again and I will give you an honest answer. She looked up. Most men would run. I am rather counting on it. Lucien Marable, Duke of Vernham, who had never in his life carried his own bags, said, "When do we begin?" There was a fortnight between the setting of the trial and the leaving of Lady Ashcombe for the coast, and in that fortnight the Duke of Vernham did a thing he had not done since he was a very young man. He found himself nervous. It was absurd, and he knew it was absurd, and knowing did not help in the least. He had faced down cabinet ministers and creditors, and the massed matchmaking mothers of 3 counties without a flicker. And now the prospect of 6 weeks alone in a cold house, adding up columns of figures under the sardonic eye of a clergyman's Eastern companion, filled him with a low, persistent, wholly unfamiliar dread. Because he understood, in a way he could not have explained to anyone, that the trial she had set him was not really about ledgers. It was about whether there was anything in him worth 6 weeks of a clever woman's undivided attention once the title and the 12,000 a year had been set aside at the door. He had spent his life being wanted for those things. He had never once been tested on what remained when they were gone, and he was very much afraid that the answer was not enough. He called on her 3 more times before the fortnight was out, ostensibly to arrange the practical business of the house closing, in truth because he could not keep away. "You have come to inspect the ledgers before the battle," Beatrix said on the first of these visits, showing him into the steward's room with a candle. "Very prudent. A general surveys the ground. I warn you, the ground is dull. My aunt's steward died 2 years ago and was never replaced, on grounds of economy. So the accounts are kept by me in my hand, and they are perfectly correct and perfectly tedious, and you will spend 6 weeks discovering that a great house is mostly a machine for spending money slightly faster than it comes in. You keep the accounts yourself. Someone must. My aunt cannot see the figures and would not understand them if she could. She is a great lady of the old sort who believes that money simply appears like weather. So I keep them, and I keep the house running on rather less than it costs, which is a conjuring trick I perform daily and no one notices." She said it without self-pity, setting the candle down among the ledgers. "Does it shock you, your grace? a gentlewoman who does sums. It does not shock me, Lucian said, and found that with her he thought of himself by his Christian name and not his title, for she had a way of stripping a man down to it. It humbles me. I have never in my life kept my own accounts. I have men for it. I sign what they put before me, and I have not the faintest idea whether the figures are honest. They are probably not, Beatrix said cheerfully. Men who sign what is put before them are the natural prey of men who put things before them to sign. It is one of the many reasons I never wish to be rich. Poverty at least obliges one to know exactly where every farthing goes. She opened a ledger and turned it toward him. Here, this is a rent roll. Tell me what you see. He looked at it. It was a column of names and sums, and it meant nothing to him at all, and he was on the point of saying something clever and evasive when he saw her watching him, and understood that the cleverness would fail the test before the test had even begun. I see, he said slowly, that I do not know how to read it. That is the honest answer. I have owned land since I was 19, and I have never once understood what a rent roll actually is. Teach me. Something changed in Beatrix Callowell's face, a softening, quickly mastered, but he saw it. She had expected him to bluff. She had set a trap for a man's vanity, and he had walked past it and asked to be taught, and it was the first small crack in her long, careful certainty that he was only a bored duke chasing a locked door. Very well, she said. Sit down. A rent roll is a list of the people who live on the land and what they owe, and if you read it properly, how they are faring. This name here, the Hobbs family, has paid late 3 quarters running, a little more late each time. That is not idleness. The Hobbases are the most industrious tenants my aunt has. It is trouble, illness most likely, or a failed crop, or a death. A steward who signs what is put before him sees a bad tenant to be turned out. A person who reads sees a family in difficulty who ought to be helped through it, because a family helped through a bad year will pay you loyally for 20 good ones after. She looked at him. That is what a rent roll is, your grace. It is not a column of figures. It is 100 lives, and the figures are only the shadows they cast on paper. Most of your kind never learn to see past the shadows. I am curious whether you can. Lucian looked at the name of a family he had never met and never would, and felt something turn over in him that had been asleep his whole life. Show me the others, he said. Show me all of them. I want to learn to see. He stayed 2 hours past any propriety, bent over the ledgers in the candlelight while she taught him to read the lives behind the figures, and when he finally rose to go, stiff and ink-stained and strangely exhilarated, Beatrix walked him to the door and said, with the first genuine uncertainty he had ever heard from her, "You are not at all what I expected, your grace. It is very inconvenient of you. I had my whole opinion of you arranged, and it was a comfortable opinion, and you keep declining to fit it." Good, said Lucian. I have spent 15 years fitting everyone's opinion of me. It will do me good to disappoint one. He drove home through the dark with the smell of ink and tallow on his hands, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was looking forward to something. Not to winning her he had stopped, somewhere in those 2 hours, thinking of it as winning, but simply to the 6 weeks themselves. To being, for 6 weeks, a man learning to read a rent roll under the eye of a woman who saw 100 lives where he had only ever seen a signature. He had thought the trial was a hardship to be endured. He understood now that it was a gift, and that she had given it to him precisely because she did not yet believe he would recognize it as one. The 6 weeks did not begin gently. On the 3rd day, having put his elbow through the window pane, the Duke of Vernham discovered that a great house being closed for the winter is not a matter of drawing curtains and locking doors, but a vast, dusty, aching labor of shrouding furniture in Holland, of climbing to check the state of 100 windows against the coming frosts, of walking the tenanted farms to settle accounts before the roads grew bad, of accounting for every candle and every sack of flour so that nothing should be wasted or spoiled in the empty months. Beatrix did all of it as a matter of course, having done it every autumn for years, and she set him to it beside her without ceremony, and Lucien, who had never in his life performed a single act of physical labor that was not sport, found himself, by the end of the first week, sore in muscles he had not known he possessed, and to his own considerable astonishment, happier than he had been in a decade. There was a freedom in it he had never tasted. No one was watching. No mother angled a daughter at him across a ballroom. No politician sought his ear. No tradesman bowed too low. No one in the whole cold, empty house wanted a single thing from the Duke of Vernham, because there was no Duke of Vernham here. There was only Lucien, in a plain coat with dust in his hair, being told by a clergyman's niece that he had shuttered a window crookedly and would have to do it again. "You are enjoying this," Beatrix accused him on the 10th day, catching him whistling as he coiled a length of rope. "I am appalled to discover that I am," he admitted. "I keep waiting to be bored or to resent it or to remember that I am a duke and this is beneath me. None of it comes. I banked a fire this morning entirely by myself, and I was more pleased with the fire than I have ever been with any honor the crown has given me. What is happening to me, Miss Callowell? Have you bewitched me?" "Certainly not. I have merely deprived you of everything that made you miserable and given you honest work and honest company, which is what half the great men in England are dying for, and none of them will admit." She was up a ladder as she said it, fastening a shutter, and a strand of hair had come loose across her face, and there was dust on her cheek, and Lucien, holding the foot of the ladder and looking up at her, was struck so hard and so suddenly by the plain fact of loving her that he forgot to breathe. She was not beautiful in the way the season prized. She was better than beautiful. She was entirely, unimprovably herself, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life at the foot of her ladder, handing up whatever she needed and being told he had done it crookedly. The evenings were the danger. In the daytime there was work enough to keep a decent distance, but when the light failed there was nothing to do in the great dim house but sit by the one lit fire and talk and read. She made him read aloud Marcus Aurelius, at her insistence, in revenge for his having called the Stoic tedious, and he read badly at first and then well, and once he stopped in the middle of a passage and said, "He is not tedious. I called him tedious at 19. He is only a lonely man trying very hard to be good," which at 19 I could not recognize because I had not yet been lonely. Beatrix, sewing by the fire, did not look up, because if she had looked up he would have seen everything, and she was not ready for that. "No," she said, very quietly. "One cannot recognize it until one has been it." "Have you been lonely, Beatrix?" The needle paused. "I have been alone a great deal," she said carefully. "It is not the same thing. Alone is only a circumstance. Lonely is when you begin to want a particular person's company and cannot have it, and I have been very careful all my life never to want any particular person's company, precisely so that I should never be lonely. It has served me admirably." She resumed her sewing. "Until recently." The fire ticked in the grate. Neither of them said anything for a long moment, and the unsaid thing sat between them, warm and terrible. "Do not," she said at last, though he had not moved, "say anything gallant. It is not the 3rd week yet. You promised me 6. If you are the man I am beginning to fear you are, you will hold to the whole 6 and let me have my proof, because a woman who has guarded herself as long as I have does not surrender to a feeling in the 3rd week by firelight. She surrenders, if she surrenders at all, to evidence, to a man who came and stayed and worked and did not run, all 6 weeks, with nothing to gain and no one watching. Give me my evidence, Lucien. Do not cheat me of it with a pretty speech now." "6 weeks, then," he said, and his voice was not quite steady. "You shall have every hour of them. But I give you notice, Beatrix Callowell, that at the end of the 6th I intend to say every gallant thing I have been swallowing all at once, and you will have to listen to the entire backlog." She laughed. A real laugh startled out of her and covered it with her hand, and the sound of it in the great empty house was the finest thing Lucien Marable had ever heard. She had been counting on him to run. He did not run. He arrived at the great echoing house the week Lady Ashcombe left for the coast, in a plain coat, with one servant and one horse, and he presented himself in the hall like a man reporting for duty. Beatrix, who had privately wagered with herself that he would last 3 days, handed him a ledger and a stub of pencil, and the Duke of Vernham sat down at the long deal table in the steward's room, and frowning like a schoolboy, began to add up columns of figures. He was terrible at it. He was terrible at nearly all of it. He put his elbow through a window pane he was trying to shutter, and had to have his hand bound. He tallied a rent account 3 times and got 3 different answers, each of them wrong. He offended the tenant at the mill by addressing him with a duke's careless grandeur, and had to be sent back by Beatrix to apologize, which he did stiffly, and then she watched this happen less stiffly, and then, sitting on an upturned bucket in the man's kitchen, quite humanly, listening to a miller explain the price of grain until the miller was won over entirely. He learned to carry his own bag. He learned to bank a fire and to read a rent roll and to hear, in the accounts of the estate, the lives of the people they represented. And in the long evenings when the light failed and there was nothing to do but sit by the one lit fire in the vast dim house, he read to her. Marcus Aurelius at her insistence. He read badly at first and then well, and once he stopped in the middle of a passage and said, "He is not tedious. I called him tedious at 19. He is only a lonely man trying very hard to be good," which at 19 I could not recognize because I had not yet been lonely. Beatrix, sewing by the fire, did not look up, because if she had looked up he would have seen everything, and she was not ready for that. "No," she said, very quietly. "One cannot recognize it until one has been it." Something had happened over 6 weeks that neither of them had planned. The armor had come off, both suits of it, and what was underneath had turned out to fit. She stopped waiting for him to fail. He stopped performing altogether. There was no one to perform for. In the empty house, stripped of title and audience and everything that had ever made him doubt his own worth or hers, they became simply Lucian and Beatrix, a man and a woman who argued about Stoics and shuttered windows together and laughed, in the dust and the cold, more than either had laughed in years. On the last night the house was closed. The ledgers were balanced. She had balanced them. He had helped, which was different, and he knew the difference now. They sat by the fire in the empty drawing-room. Holland covers ghostly over the furniture, and Lucian set down the book. "The 6 weeks are finished," he said. "You said if I still wanted you at the end I might ask again." "I did say that." Her voice was not steady. She had known this was coming and had dreaded it and hoped for it in equal, terrible measure. He did not kneel. He knew her too well now for theater. He simply looked at her across the low fire, ink on his cuff and a healing cut on his hand. No duke at all. Only a man who had learned to add sums and bank fires and apologize to millers and read a lonely emperor aloud. "Beatrix Callowell," he said, "I have spent 15 years being wanted for everything that is not me, and I had begun to believe there was nothing else in me to want. You did not want any of it. You wanted me to add my sums correctly and stop showing off my nervous horse and read to you in the evenings, and in wanting so little you made me, for the first time, want to be a man worth wanting. I am not asking you to fall into the well. I am asking you to let me stand in it with you, where the world cannot see us and cannot make either of us pay, and be, for the rest of our lives, exactly what we have been these 6 weeks. I have never in my life waited for anything. I have waited for you, and I find it is the only thing I have ever done that felt like being alive. Marry me, not the Duke, me." And Beatrix, who had a ready answer for everything, who had never in her life been at a loss for a dry word to hold the world at a safe distance, found that she had no words at all. She set down her sewing. She crossed the small, warm circle of firelight in the great cold house, and she took his bound-up hand in both of hers, and the tears she had refused to shed for 6 weeks came at last, and she was not ashamed of them. "You put your elbow through a window," she said, half laughing, "and you cannot add, and your horse is still overbred, and I am going to spend the rest of my life correcting your Latin." "Yes," he said. "Yes," she said, "you dreadful, dear, impossible man, yes." Lady Ashcombe, returning from the coast to find her niece betrothed to the Duke of Vernham, was so overcome that she had to be revived with sal volatile and then boasted of it as predicted, for the entire decade that followed. Society was scandalized and then, gradually, fascinated. The uncatchable Duke of Vernham had been caught, and by a poor niece who had told him to his face that she was not interested, and who continued, even as his duchess, to correct his Latin at dinner in front of the guests. He did not mind. He had spent half his life being told what he wished to hear, and he had found it a kind of starvation. Now he was told the truth every day by a woman who had married him for no advantage at all and would have been happier. She frequently reminded him, with a good book and a quiet window, except that she had discovered, to her considerable inconvenience, that she preferred his company to both. "You are the exception," she told him once, years on, at a window in the gold end of an afternoon, the two of them watching the light lie long across the lawns. "The book was Marcus Aurelius. He was very good, and I chose you over him, which is the highest compliment I have ever paid a living man, so do try not to let it go to your head." The Duke of Vernham, who had never learned to add a column of figures correctly and never would, put his arm around his wife and counted himself, without any difficulty at all, the richest man in England.